Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and friends of Cuts. A very good morning to all of you once again, and a warm welcome. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm Shuddha Chakravarti. I'll be joining as the new director of Cuts, and I'm taking over from my predecessor, who's here in the audience, Rashid. Thank you for being part of one of our many celebrations that we are celebrating the 40th year of Cuts. And what a way to kick things off today with a fireside chat between the Director General of WTO, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and our Secretary General of Cuts International, Mr. Pradeep Mehta, on a very German as well as a very pertinent issue. So before giving the floor to the speakers, it is also my heartfelt appeal to all the friends of Cuts and to all the friends of multilateralism that you'll keep on supporting us and our good work. Pradeep, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Shuddha. And that was an excellent welcome remark. Let me add to your welcome to all of you. There's only one speaker in this hall, which is Dr. Ngozi, and I'm only the questioner, or in Hindi, as it is called, the Sutradhar. I don't know what is the appropriate word in English? The narrator. I suppose that would be the most appropriate word in English. So having said that, let me give you a brief background of Cuts. When we are celebrating our 40 years, it reminds me of the time when we started this organization in 1983 out of a garage in my home. And so it's been a long journey without any mentors or any godfathers to help us to travel where we are, including being here physically in Geneva since the last 12, 15 years now. And probably the only Indian NGO which has overseas centers in 6 countries and affiliates, close affiliates in many other countries of the world. It has been an organic growth, not that we ever aimed at looking at these things. But let me come to the relevance of this particular talk by Dr. Ngozi. We ventured into international trade in July 1991, when the Uruguay round was at its peak, and we were trying to understand as to what is this new animal on the earth. I didn't understand what agriculture tariffs are. But agriculture was never a part of the international trading system, the GATT. It was brought into the WTO. Having said that, what we realized was that fellow consumer organization, sorry, a little preamble I forgot. We started off as a consumer protection organization, but over time we graduated into a public policy institution, dealing with a very large number of public policies, including we continue to do a lot of grassroots work in many parts of the world, particularly India, Kenya, Zambia, where we have centers. Now, coming back to international trade, what we did see was a globalization happening. And what we realized was that, as was a fashion quite often those days, to oppose something which is happening from outside, we thought it is important to look at the opportunities that it is going to throw up. And that is one of the key words of this particular fireside chat as well. And importantly, what we also discovered then was how multilateralism is important for the world. It is an interconnected world in any case. It is not, countries are not living in isolation or working in isolation. They are working together with other countries, whether in regional formations or across regional formations. And the WTO was one of the greatest public good that we saw happening. And also, in another manner, what we found out, it was the biggest competition regulator. We work in the competition policy. Probably I would be modest to say, or immodest to say, that we are probably the largest NGO dealing with competition policy across the world, as many of us know, and including in trade policy as well. So therefore, we even looked at WTO as promoting contestability of markets. Now, indeed, the world is not uniform. You can't expect Benin to become Britain in the next 100 years or 200 years also. even if though they have the same kind of weightage in the WTO system. And that was the other good thing about WTO, was that every country had a single vote, as against the other Bretton Woods institutions of World Bank or IMF, where voting was a little distorted. And this is still, again, a matter of discussion and debate currently as I speak. Having said that, let me come back to our situation here in the sense of what I did hear from your G7 remarks were excellent, and they makes a very good basis for our conversation. We begin with, I have certain questions in mind, as I said. Last year, you completed 2 years at the helm of WTO. What has been the most daunting challenge you have faced during this period, and which has been the most rewarding experience?
Well, thank you very much. First, I was just thinking fireside chat. I wish we had a more cozy atmosphere to do this. This doesn't look like a fireside chat, but we'll do our best. The second is, before I speak, to pay tribute to you. This is your 40th anniversary of COTS, and for a civil society organization to be able to last that long, and from a developing country, and to have field offices. Usually you see organizations founded in developed countries, that have been around and put in their roots. So it's something to be really proud of. I want to congratulate you on the substantive work you do. Congratulate COTS and you personally for what you've done. You are not, you said this was an animal that you didn't quite know when it was founded. And what I found is that since I took the job, you've had your criticisms, but they've been constructive criticisms. And I think that that's the spirit, that you should have people who criticize you, but they're doing it in a way that they want you to improve. And they're trying to give you feedback that is constructive and maybe even solutions oriented sometimes. And that's what you've done. You've got tremendous respect. So I want to pay tribute to you and to the organization. Now, so coming back now to fireside chat, you said I've been here 2 years. What's the most daunting challenge and the most rewarding? Well, first, I think on the daunting side, I think what has been quite difficult, or something I found that I wasn't expecting would be that grave, is the issue of a trust deficit. And a trust deficit in the organization among members, but I think even a trust deficit, it pervades the entire thing, even within the secretariat. You have an atmosphere in which over time trust has been lost between people, between members. And you cannot really be a strong community when there is no trust. So rebuilding that trust, and this is what lies at the behind the inability to be able to get the kinds of agreements that we've been looking for. Now, there are historical reasons for that trust and current reasons. Of course, developing countries very disappointed at the lack of completion of the Doha round, have lost trust in the system and feel that what had been promised, that this would be a way to rebalance what they saw as a set of agreements that were not exactly in their favor. That didn't work. So that has created part of the trust. The other is politics and geopolitics. That is constant. And remember that trade is also domestic politics. So people sometimes play the WTO card domestically because it suits them, and that creates distrust with other members. So that has been the most challenging thing. And it's challenging for the fact that you need to build trust in order to reach agreements. On the other hand, and you don't build trust by talking about trust, you build it through action. So when I found this situation, and I spoke openly about it, so what I'm saying is not new about the trust deficit. I think what I thought would be a good way to try to solve it is, can we even achieve anything together? Because the only way you begin to create trust is if people have common success together. And that's the most interesting and the nicest thing that I found is that members were able to come together to deliver a successful MC12 beyond the expectations of most people, even the members themselves.
Yeah.
And they will tell you they didn't really believe that anything was going to come of it. And at the end, I have to give them credit and commend them and commend the staff of the Secretariat who also worked so hard to back this up, that we got quite a big success out of MC12. And that creates the basis to say, okay, we've achieved together. That means there's a possibility for us to achieve more.
Thank you. Thank you, Ngozi. And just two short diversions from this conversation which is happening is, I must also welcome a large number of delegates from missions here and hope that they're able to carry the message across. Secondly, there are a large number of people who are with us virtually. So I would like to also welcome them to this event from all over the world. Having said that, on competition policy, I still remember one outcome of our effort was when Ngozi was the finance minister in Nigeria. And then I met her and badgered her. I said, look, and she was surprised that Nigeria doesn't have a competition law. And voila, Nigeria has an active competition law. In fact, one of the best in Africa now. I must congratulate you, Ngozi, it's your legacy.
Thank you.
Having said that, let me come back to this conversation. And there seems to be widespread agreement that the WTO needs institutional reform. And this is motherhood statement. The rule book needs updation and the two-tier dispute settlement system needs to be revived. An issue which you spoke about at the G7 in Tokyo also the other day. Yet, what we heard was Catherine Tai's speech yesterday at the American University is, I don't think America wants to move forward in any way whatsoever. There are systemic concerns and different positions, and the bridge, I mean, it seems too far to bridge. What do you think is the way forward? I mean, do you have a magic wand?
A magic wand. No, there's absolutely no magic wand, but there's also absolutely no doubt that the organization needs reform. And we should reform it against the background of being cognizant of what it has achieved. Yeah. Because it's now very popular for people to talk about, the globalization is over, free trade doesn't work, we didn't gain anything out of it. There's actually an excellent article by Alan Wolf and others of the PII talking about this. It's become fashionable. And so I like to remind people that what was created 75 years ago with GATT and then the WTO has largely delivered. And when I say it, it finds resonance. We need to remind each other. It's delivered so much that I term the multilateral trading system and the WTO a global public good. Yeah. That has to be husbanded because it's the nature of the kind of thing which if you destroy, you will pay so heavily for it that you wish you hadn't. So it's good to remind ourselves how that system has delivered. It has largely brought peace because the premise was that interdependence and trade would help to foster peace. There has been no major war until recently. We've had wars, but no major world wars. So it's delivered on that. It has delivered prosperity, lifted 1 billion people out of poverty. And people say, yes, China benefited and East Asia a lot. But if you take them out of the equation and look at the numbers, you still see that the rest of the world benefited. Maybe not at the same rate, but they did. The third thing is that it has it's been quite disinflationary. And one of the most interesting things I'm doing now is that we are much in demand by central bankers because trade helped to bring a disinflationary environment because consumer goods were cheaper. And it helped to improve the wealth and the living standards of people, even in poor countries. So now we are in an inflationary environment and people are wanting to know what will trade look like and central bankers. I was just at the BIS a couple of weeks ago to talk to the 68 central bankers from all over the world there. So trade has delivered. The issue is, was it perfect? The answer is no. There were certainly those who didn't benefit. As I always say, poor people in rich countries and regions in rich countries that lost, and poor countries that didn't benefit. But we should also remember that technology has been a bigger mover of loss of jobs in some cases. So we shouldn't blame trade entirely. But there were industries where competition led to winners and losers. And had governments had active labor market policies to deal with those losses, as our economics textbooks tell us, we wouldn't be where we were. But some governments did not put in place active labor market policies and social policies to deal with it. And so we had those poor people who were, losers in the game, were not really helped. And that has led to discontent, populism, and what we see these days. So we have to come back and say, that's the background. Now, against that, you also have to look at what we have and say the world is changing so fast as we speak. But have the rules and the laws here and the agreements that were made been changing to keep pace? The answer is no. Our negotiations function, our monitoring and transparency function, and our dispute settlement function all need to be looked at and strengthened so that the organization will be fit for purpose. And that is the reform we are talking about. Of course, out of all of that is the reform of the dispute settlement system, which is not working. It's not completely paralyzed, as most people think. We have about 20 ongoing disputes now that are being adjudicated and others. But that has stood out as one that is very glaring, in the sense that if your dispute settlement system doesn't work well, then it damages a bit the credibility, because why are you making new agreements where the place where they should be adjudicated doesn't work? So that's where the issue lies. Now, we need to reform this, and reform is ongoing. Some of it is reform going on in the committees, and members will tell you this is reforming by doing, and there's a lot more activity in the committees now than before, and that's a good thing. And we should learn from those committees whose ways of working are considered best practice, so we can move them to others. But then we have to look at bigger reforms. We'll have to look at what's happening with trade and ask ourselves, what do we need to be doing? So for me, reform is not just also just dealing with what we have in place, but asking ourselves the question, do we have the skills? Do we have the means? Do we have the agreements needed today in the 21st century to say we are fit for purpose to serve both developed and developing countries? And my answer would be, no, we don't. We have agreements that have been reached years ago, which may not be fit for purpose, and there are complaints. So, but coming to the most glaring issue, the dispute settlement system, I don't know, but as you said, I was with the G7 trade ministers a few days ago, virtually. And I think that there's now, there was a recognition at MC12 that we need to reform this. And a date was taken of 2024.
Yeah.
And we have said that we have MC13 at the beginning of 2024. Let's try and see what we can deliver by then. Now, the good news is the Americans had a lot of criticisms of the system. That is why they blocked the functioning of the appellate body. Are some of those criticisms valid? The answer is yes, if you look at them objectively. These are things that should be looked at in the context of the reform. So what we're saying is, the best way to deal with these criticisms is to reform the system to respond to those. And it's not only the US, developing countries, emerging markets, some of them have questions and issues about the functioning of this system. So the bottom line is, the good news is there's movement. We have the informal processes going on. We have a facilitator who is working, and we're hoping that all of this will yield significant enough agreement that we can actually begin to lay down how this system will be reformed and get something going by MC30.
That comes straight away segues into the next question. I mean, you have huge experience of working with international organizations, World Bank, for example, and which each have their own decision-making processes which are distinct from one and the other. For example, you also had suggested that we should not have this biennial meeting, but should have an annual meeting or biennial meeting, or sorry, biannual meeting, so that there is no tension that, look, you need this particular outcome, except that ministers could come and continue to advance the process, which might, in my view, might be more helpful than the current system of meeting after every 2 years and then hoping that we have to agree to this and there's a disagreement and so on. Now, so how do you think that the decision-making process in WTO can remain member-driven, consensus-based, and yet be more outcome-oriented?
That's a tough one. Well, first of all, Brazil has now formally tabled a proposal as a member for annual meetings. And the reason why, I think you said, I said it when I first came, the reason why it looked like a good idea is because it's part of also building trust.
Yeah.
If you see each other once every 2 or 3 years or 4, how do you build trust? By then, you've probably had changes in some governments of trade ministers 2 or 3 times over. There are few countries since I came, they've had 3 or 4 trade ministers in the 2 years I've been here. How do you build trust when you don't meet them? You meet so infrequently. So even if you don't deliver agreements at every meeting, having trade ministers see each other, this is, I've seen it, I've observed it as a 7-year finance minister. You meet with your colleagues, you get to know them. Every 6 months you meet. And you build trust. You can talk to each other. You can learn best practices of what they're doing in their countries. I remember asking the South African finance minister at one point in time to help me when I wanted to increase revenues in my own country. And I said, you were able to get an extra $500 million. How did you do it? And then he told me, and I did that. And we got $600,000 and we were aiming for $1 billion. So you see these people, you build trust, you talk to them. It's not just about this, it's about learning from each other. And I thought that would be good because when you do that, then when you come to negotiate, you already have an atmosphere where, look, I know this person, I've been talking to them, I can trust them a little bit. I still have my own interest of my own country to defend. So that is partly why, that suggestion of maybe meeting more frequently could have been a good thing. And Brazil, as I said, is tabling it. Now, yeah, so I would say that if there's any way to support a process by which trade ministers can build more trust with each other and meet more frequently, that would help.
Coming to my next question, which is something we are engaged with in G20 as well in Delhi, and you were there in G20 meetings. The G20 has taken up the issue of WTO reforms as serious as it is happening in other fora, including at G7. Because frankly, I mean, so this kind of discussion which are happening on the sidelines only shows the fact that there are countries who recognize the value of the WTO. It is the only multilateral instrument which is effective with high levels of democracy. Whether it is good or bad, that's another issue. But the problem is, as you have said earlier as well, there is a perception that the WTO is not being able to address the developmental concerns of developing countries. You spoke about Doha agenda, for example. My own country, India, is very cheesed that Doha agenda did not move forward. And what we have suggested to them is that, look, let's take up issues which can be doable under the Doha agenda and move forward and forget the Doha agenda. I mean, since it is dead. Now, how can we mainstream developmental concerns of the WTO beyond the traditional tools such as special and differential treatment?
Well, I'll come back a little bit to just a bit in the last question you asked me about how can we get consensus and so on, because it's pertinent to what I want to say about the development agenda.
Right. Okay.
The pertinence is that, look, WTO is a negotiating forum. And so negotiations per force demand compromise. One of the things that has been quite surprising to me when I came, although at MC12 we were able to break through and get it, was that I thought there's not much compromising going on here. People seem to just come and state their positions and then, that's it. And if you go back, you see the same statements they made for the past 10 years, they just keep making the same statements. I was challenging people. If you're really here to negotiate, negotiation means compromise. It means you have to move from whatever position you held and meet the other party halfway. And that also applies to what I'm going to say. For the development agenda, I believe that historically, let's accept the fact that developing countries felt hard done by, and there's some truth to that. But how do we move going forward? So revisiting history is good, but it might not get you very far. And you should focus on what do you need now to develop. That's also what I said at the meeting of EU Africa. For developing countries, I'll be focusing on how do I grow my economy? What do I need to get out of this WTO that will help me grow my economy, create jobs for my young people, export more, all of that. Are we missing agreements here? Because we're focused on, we didn't do this agreement, we didn't do that agreement, we didn't do existing agreements that may not even be fit for purpose. But are we thinking of new agreements? And I posed that question to a group of members. What about, have you thought of new agreements that would be beneficial to you that are not even being negotiated? Shouldn't you be working on that and saying, look, if I need to get more investment into my economy to create jobs, what do I need to do? If I need to add value to my products, I mean, we cannot in Africa continue exporting raw materials and commodities and be subject to the volatility of the external markets. It doesn't even create jobs. If I'm going to add value to the raw materials I'm exporting, what do I need to do that from investment and trade? And how does WTO contribute? That's the kind of conversation I think we should be having.
Exactly.
Not going to, with all due respect, yes, agriculture, we need a breakthrough. Yes, fisheries and all that. We need to do those, but beyond that, I do not see this fresh conversation. And if we are going to help developing countries, beyond saying, let's give us more S&DT, give us this, let us ask the fundamental question. Do we have agreements here that will deliver jobs, investment, and growth to my economy? If we don't have them, what are those agreements we need to negotiate that we are not? So let's not live so much in the past, even though it did us wrong. Let's grab the future.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think what we need is a fresh agenda for value addition. Ratnakar, that's a challenge for you. Having said that, now, next question is, there is a growing interest in...
So Pradeep, let me just say, I'm not saying S&DT is not important, please. So that the headline is not, DG says S&DT is dead. No, S&DT is good. We need to look at it and we need to get it and reform it, and it's written.
Positives.
Yeah, no, I believe in it. I'm just saying, let's not constrain our agenda to that alone. Let's think and imagine. And what excites me, you can see, is that kind of imagination.
No, I mean, ITC is doing a lot of work in this particular area, but I think the point which you made is, do we need any agreements to sort of bind it in that, look, we have to have this kind of approach to poverty alleviation, job creation in the developing world? So that we go back to the preamble of the WTO, which people often forget. Having said that, my next question is, there is a growing interest in coalitions of the willing in the form of plurilaterals, joint statement initiatives within the WTO itself. do these reduce the centrality of the WTO as the forum for multilateral trade negotiations, or do they signal flexibility and a reimagination of the WTO's role?
Well, I think that, look, the thing that is fantastic about the WTO and we're most proud of is that everyone has a voice. Even the smallest country has a voice. So the single undertaking and multilateral agreements are by far and away the best instrument. And we should really strive to keep that. That being said, I have to say the world is moving so fast that a uni-instrument organization might not be fit for purpose and even be as strong as that. How do you deal with so many emerging issues and the evolution of the world? So I think we need to be creative and imaginative and say to ourselves that in the world, fast-moving world we are in today, we need multiple instruments to be able to deal with it. So it's not an ideological issue. That need not and should not undermine the multilateral instrument. And in fact, if you're doing a plurilateral and you do it well, you should be thinking of how this ultimately becomes a multilateral. But we need those instruments. Now look at the investment facilitation agreement. There are 112 members negotiating, the 77 are developing countries.
Yeah.
So you can't stop it. It's obvious to me this is something that people feel they want. And we should be aiming to see how to multilateralize that when 2/3 of members come together and say, listen, we need this. So we need to have both instruments and one should not undermine the other.
No, we fully endorse investment facilitation insofar as it doesn't get into market access. To that extent, it is fine, because the moment you talk about market access, then you get into policy distortions, including. Now, my next question is, there is a less than a year to go for MC13 in Abu Dhabi. The limited package of MC12 was welcomed as a breakthrough last June, but as you said, I mean, in my opinion, I thought it was excellent that at least stopped it from backsliding.
It wasn't limited, Pradeep.
Yeah, but
it was quite expensive given the expectation.
But does it not put greater pressure on members to deliver more concrete outcomes by MC13? Which are the areas where you are most hopeful of seeing outcomes?
Well, I wouldn't put it as putting pressure. As my famous sentence is, we don't want a miracle on Lake Geneva, which is what one of the papers wrote. I loved it, but that's not what we want. But it certainly builds the foundation on which you have very few excuses not to get outcomes at MC13. If you were able to have that breakthrough and members came together, and I again want to give them all the credit and all the thanks for what they did, then we've shown we can do it. Actually, in every G20 and G7 meeting, when I have the chance and people are bemoaning multilateralism not working, I remind them that there's one multilateral organization that had Russia, Ukraine, US, China, EU, developed countries around the table and delivered some binding agreements. Not even a framework, binding agreements. That's pretty unique. So we should be able to carry that momentum into MC13, complete some of the work we've done. Very important to me is the ratification of the fisheries subsidies agreement. Yeah. Again, there's no point getting agreements when they lie around for 3 or 4 years unratified. And in the case of fisheries, we're talking about the sustainability of our oceans, meaning that they're getting overfished, illegally fished, 50% overfished whilst we're sitting here. So I'm in a big hurry to get this thing ratified so that we can deal with that overfishing and illegal fishing and all that. So that's a deliverable.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we've got others.
I would like to open the floor for a few questions, but in the meanwhile, let me ask you my last question. Since we're already running against time, CSOs and NGOs have been powerful voices both for and against the work of the WTO. In this context, what should be the role of NGOs which recognize the immense value of rules-based multilateral trading system with a well-functioning WTO at its center? How do you think NGOs like CUTS, which believes in this, can help create a better buy-in for trade multilateralism and the WTO?
Well, I've always been a believer in civil society and have worked with them and been on the boards of several and been a member of several my entire career.
mm.
So I think civil society organizations are very important. And, Cuts, as I said, you've been a critic, but the criticism has been constructive in pointing out, look, here's where you could do better. Here's how you could approach some particular issues. Here is where you might correct some wrong perceptions of what's going on. And that has been exceedingly valuable, particularly coming from a big country like India. So I hope we can get civil society voices that will do that. That being said, I mean, I said I came and found a trust deficit. I must also tell you my astonishment to find a set of civil society organizations whose objective is actually for the WTO not to thrive or prosper.
To be burnt down.
Yeah, they're completely, no matter what we do. In fact, the more we succeed, the more they hate the WTO. That I do not understand. There are a set of civil society organizations whose objective is for the WTO not to succeed. That I don't understand. You can criticize an organization, criticize the objectives, and give it, and that should be true. We should be able to listen to that. But your objective should be to make it better, not to stop it. Similarly, you have media whose objective is to undercut the organization, undermine it, sow distrust. And I've never encountered that in my entire life, that you have dedicated media whose objective is to undermine an organization, tell untruths about it, sow distrust among members and secretariat and civil society. So that is not the way to go. The way to go is to have civil society feeding into you, criticizing you. And we're open to listen to that and then saying, here are possible solutions. So that's the role of civil society. And I think you should be talking to your civil society members, and you know who those people are.
No, very large.
They should change their ways.
No, very large number of us believe in the same philosophy as we do, that it is an important public good, global public good, and we should continue to strive to see to it that it functions well and is able to sort of enable the trust, particularly which is the deficit.
And you let them know, no matter what they do, this place will survive and thrive.
Ngozi, the fact is that this conversation is taking place. The fact is that this conversation is taking place is a symbol of this particular point which I'm making. Wouldn't be here. Having said that, I'll be happy to take a few questions. Please identify yourself and your question as sharp as possible so that we can move around.
Okay, thank you. My name is Colin Murdoch, and I
Ambassador?
represent Colin Murdoch.
How do you do?
I do well, thank you. I represent the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States here at the WTO, and I want to congratulate Cuts and Dr. Ngozi. Very good event here today. My question is, in the discussion you have had, and although you mentioned it at the beginning, I get the impression that you have downplayed the geopolitical element in the difficulties being faced by the WTO. And sometimes we get the impression that some of the difficulties are deliberate. In some of the dysfunctions, especially in, let us say, the paralysis we find in the appellate body. So what role do you see the geopolitical element playing in some of the difficulties facing the WTO? Thank you.
Rounds or so.
2 rounds, right.
Yeah, so let's have the geopolitical elements.
Right. Any other question? Any question virtually? Fine, please go ahead.
Okay. So while WTO people should feel free to ask. Your Excellency, you're absolutely right. Yeah, I didn't want to harp on it, because geopolitical tensions is what we live every day. I certainly live it on a minute by minute basis. It colors the way the work that we do, and I'm managing tensions all the time. So I've now taken it as part of what I have to deal with. But certainly geopolitical tensions are quite important. And you heard me say that trade is part of domestic politics and policy. So to that extent, the WTO gets also roped in as part of countries' domestic policies and politics. And sometimes it's not necessarily any one country or the other. You see that, having the WTO as an enemy you can bash can sometimes be helpful. So we have to be grown up. It's like, when countries are doing reform, I've lived this before, if you worked in a multilateral like the World Bank or the IMF, when countries have to do reform, domestically, it's easier for them to say, listen, we are being forced by the IMF to do this, or the World Bank. Sometimes that is true and sometimes it's not. So the WTO, we should realize the politics of what we're doing, and it does contribute. But the reason I don't dwell on it so much is because I don't want it to become the reason or be seen as the reason why we don't move forward. Because even those countries who are, have this geopolitical tension, they're willing to do things. You just need to have a positive mindset and accept no for an answer and keep going. If you now say, oh, we have this geopolitics and this member or that member is doing this or that, and that's stopping me, then you won't get anything done. And I'm not of that mindset. We must get stuff done here, regardless. And that's just it.
And a proof of that was in MC12, that in spite of the conflict which is happening between Russia and Ukraine, there was an agreement. They were there inside the room. Otherwise, people were worried whether in G20, they're having problem of issuing a statement as well.
But we got binding agreements when they couldn't even issue an agreed statement at G20. I think in Bali, they finally managed to get one. So I think we should just move forward. Yeah. We have to navigate these tensions. But the worst thing is to let any kinds of tensions or perceptions thereof paralyze the organization into not delivering. Because then that's when you become not relevant.
Yeah.
And we can't allow that.
Any other questions? As the DG said, anybody from the Secretariat is welcome to ask a question, so you should not feel shy. Gangadhar, would you like to? No. Anna, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to ask about the digital economy. And so this is one of those new topics that provides opportunities, but also needs to be channeled in the right way to deliver the right outcomes, I believe. And so to Dr. Ngozi, our Director General, what's your vision on work of the WTO on that? And if I may also ask Pradeep, how can CUTS and the civil society help the WTO work on this, also bridging between different community, different international organizations, the civil society, the competition community, for example, as one of your areas of focus? Thank you.
When I look at the numbers and I say the future of trade is digital, it's services, I mean it, because that's what the numbers are telling us. And you've seen we just released our latest forecasts. If you look at the numbers, you see that goods is strong and solid. Merchandise trade is not going anywhere. Out of $31 trillion of total global trade, merchandise trade is 25 trillion. So I'm not saying it's going away, but you should see where the growth areas are. And the growth was in services before the pandemic. It's recovering. But there's a segment of services that is just growing at phenomenal rates. And that's digitally delivered services. All those things through the video streaming, the education, all those services being provided. And it looks like it will grow more. It's growing at 8% or so since 2000 to 2022. When goods is growing at about slightly more than 5%. And it's gone to 3.8 trillion, almost $4 trillion dollars, and 13% of total trade. That's phenomenal growth. So, and we know that the young generation, this is going to be their thing. So it's going to grow even more. So the question we need to, this is exciting to me. I get really excited when I think about it. So how do we at the WTO, what is it we do with this? You know, how do we help our members? There are those who would want to benefit, but they don't have the digital infrastructure. They don't have the regulatory framework. So we are not a financing agency. So we need to liaise and cooperate with others who can help us build the infrastructure in those countries that don't have it. We can help with the regulatory framework, but we need to partner. So we've actually talked to the World Bank and said to them, you know, would you be willing to start with some pilot countries, identify members who would like to build up the infrastructure? Because that's partly why they don't participate in some of the negotiations. So that's one thing we can do, and we're trying to do. I think the second, and we have just started this pilot now in Africa. We'll pick up 3 or 4 countries. The World Bank team is looking at it, and we'll talk to them at the spring meetings. Then we can move to other parts of the world. I think the second thing to ask ourselves is, on the digital trade, do we have the rules eventually that can help this work? Is there a level playing field? Do we know how we cross-border data flows? What do we do with these? Ask ourselves the questions about what we can do on rules and regulation. And I think here we have 2 tracks. We have the multilateral track on the e-commerce moratorium and the work program. And we also have the plurilateral track on the e-commerce negotiations. And we should work on both and push both. That's the third thing is to say, are we fit for purpose in the Secretariat to help with this work? Do we have the skills we need? If a member wants advice, or we have some committees created, or we have some specific, do we have the people who have these skills? And when I look at the skill set we have, we don't. And that's one of the things we are looking at. How can do we continue just hiring the same old skills we have before, without looking at what is happening to the future? That's part of why we are doing this visioning and strategy exercise. It's not an empty thing. You see the data in front of you telling you one story, and you're just sitting and you're not doing anything to make yourself fit for purpose to help that story work for your members. So if we can vision where we are going, and we can do a strategy and look at the resources and the skills we have to serve, that's what we are trying to do now, so that this organization can be fit for purpose to deliver for the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. With that, let me respond to the question which Anna had raised to me. And continuing on from where Ngozi left, in terms of skill sets in the digital area, Ngozi, may I request you to look across to UNCTAD, which has got a very pulsating work plan. We are also a member of the UNCTAD's E-Trade for All initiative, which comprises of 35 members. So you don't have to look far beyond Geneva to see what kind of skill sets. And
will they lend me the staff to come and work here? Because I can call. The World Bank just hired 100 people. Digital skills.
No, I'll persuade them. I say, look,
well, if they will, I don't mind.
I'm a taxpayer, so I have a right on them, on you.
No, mind at all if I don't have to pay for it.
No, I'm just concluding. Now, just to answer your question, a lot of work that we do, the intervention that we do in Geneva come from a very grassroots primary and secondary survey that we do in many developing countries. That's one of our strengths, that when we bring in any issues here, we talk very substantial background, and therefore that even Ngozi finds very convincing, even if it is critical. So we'll continue to do that in the sense that to build a wider coalition of support that look, in my opinion, it is very myopic for delegates to not appreciate the fact is that this is the only instrument of multilateralism which is surviving today, and the rest are, and we require multilateralism in order to deal with many other problems For example, climate change. It's a huge agenda, much bigger than the trade agenda today, which you have also been speaking on. We had the pandemic problem, which Ngozi handled beautifully in her own way. And I mean, the rest of the world handled it in a different way. But do we only respond to crisis? So are we going to respond to a crisis in the trade field when it comes? Or should we look at it through a visionary lens and then take it forward? With that, I would like to thank you. There's one question
Yeah, that's one.
from our ambassador in India.
Thank you, Pradeep, and thank you, DG, for the fascinating discussion today. My question is, I wanted to allude to what Pradeep earlier mentioned about India being a bit disappointed, in terms of why this organization has not really delivered on the development agenda. And frankly speaking, that is a view shared by large number of countries, especially from the global south. So therefore, my question is to you, DG, is number one, like in terms of how you are looking forward, like, what sort of agenda you have or plan you have in terms of not only looking at new issues that we need to look at, but how do we can also, look at some of the old issues, which unfortunately, are still lingering on, because I think addressing them would in a way would address the trust deficit that you yourself mentioned, because that trust deficit also spans across the global north and global south divide. The second related message or a question is, what message you want to give to countries on both sides of the aisle, now what they could do better in terms of what they've been doing so far, so that they can also play a role in helping bridge that trust deficit. But at the end of the day, because this is a member-driven organization and they are the ones who need to lead, whatever that we accomplish in this. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to. I said thank you for the question. Yeah, addressing old issues, yes. We need to address them, but I was urging that sometimes we are so buried in addressing old issues that we are forgetting that there are new issues that could yield us maybe even more than the old ones. But certainly we need to address old, but we need to address them maybe with a new lens, looking at what are the issues that confront us now and maybe into the future. So certainly with agriculture, I've urged we look at it from a food security lens, because it's becoming very clear that food security is going to be very difficult for the world. We look at it from a lens of climate change, even water. If we are going to be food secure, these are some of the things so can we relook at agriculture and the agreement from those perspectives and say, is what we are talking about addressing the existential threats that will face us if we can't feed ourselves? Or if certain regions of the world that used to be bread baskets suddenly find that due to droughts, they can no longer produce. These are things that are not fiction. They are fact. It's facing us. So that's the way I would come at it, and then try to reinvigorate the old issues and certainly deal with them. And it's compromise. I want to say that again. We are not going to get any agreements without all sides putting aside some of their issues and coming to the middle, which you did so beautifully at MC12. We need to do it so that we can move forward. And then we need to, as I said, look at the new issues. What can members, do better with each other? I think practically some of the dialogue that we've been having that is not about negotiations also helps. I find that very quickly, everything here turns into my negotiating position. And that makes it very difficult to people don't even want to hear the facts anymore. I'm telling you, you're negotiating without even knowing the facts of the situation that you're talking about, that they've changed. So I think talking together, and there's been quite positive feedback on many of the workshops and seminars that, it's not, they help people listen to each other, listen to experts, think a little more. And I think that can help bring members together, because when you're doing it, you're hopefully not negotiating, but trying to understand. And the more of those we can do, including our ministers don't have time for seminars and workshops, but they certainly have some time for some dialogue during the MC. And we did a little bit of that in MC12. We're thinking MC13, a little bit more of that. Listening to each other is not a bad thing before you plunge into the negotiating. And certainly members have it in their ability to do that, both generally and within committees.
Well, thank you very much. And that comes to, brings us to an end.
Pradeep, before you round up, you said I should go to UNCTAD to get people. The question I have for you is, why is UNCTAD able to hire digital skills? The World Bank, IMF, everybody, people just hired 100 people with digital skills. Then the WTO that actually needs to support members has to go borrowing all over the world.
No,
We can't hire people here to help members. You should be asking why we don't have those skills.
Ngozi, I'll tell you the secret of UNCTAD's success is they work through a coalition of organizations of which we are also a member. So they multiply the resources like that. So that is what.
I'm willing to work with you and any coalition that will bring us the skills we need, because it's really anomalous where you sit and this is happening and you cannot bring to bear on the organization what you need. And if I can go and borrow these people, like we're going to the bank and trying to help countries, but ultimately they can second maybe 1 or 2 people or give them part of their time, but they're not going to give me 2 or 3 staff.
Right. A senior director from UNCTAD is here.
Well, she's listening. Tell Rebecca if you can lend me 2 or 3 of the digital stuff.
I'll also tell her.
Okay.
If I may, DG, we hope also to be able to benefit from the expertise of your secretariat. So swaps are really the way to go, we think.
We need to bridge the trust deficit between UNCTAD and WTO.
There is none. Not at the top level anyway.
Not at the top level, but the
No.
operational level, I don't see any kind of conversation.
Sure about that.
Very little.
Yeah, when we met, you listen to stuff, there wasn't that much complaint about trust deficit. Maybe we ought to do what you said,
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
work together more. And we had mapped out 1 or 2 areas where we were going to do work. We
Can you-
actually went that far.
What you can do is set out structured joint working groups.
Yeah.
So then they know there is an agenda, a mandated agenda, and not just, informal.
we have
Thank
to
you.
go. Okay.
Thank you very much. This is great. And this is the first of our series of the 40th anniversary lectures. And I'm so glad and so grateful that Ngozi inaugurated the whole series. It's not just this particular lecture. And it was a very fascinating conversation. And also for the benefit of those who are watching us virtually, there is going to be a recording of this particular thing which you can get on YouTube. And many of my friends who are on Easter holiday and other meetings said they will watch it on YouTube. So I hope they watch it and respond to it. That look, the important thing is WTO is the most potent instrument of multilateralism, and that needs to be given all kinds of support and encouragement that it deserves. And let us not be myopic about it. And one thing which Ngozi said, in which troubles me also, I've been an observer of this system for the last 30 years, is that the whole WTO is a series of trade-offs. So if people sit on a very predetermined position, I think they make a blunder. Thank you.
Congratulations.